Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Boogie Board Tiki Bar. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Matt Marino. Matt, how is life in Seattle? Thank you so much for joining us.
The sun is shining. There's no rain. Life is great in Seattle.
That is all you can ask for. I always like to start when we get into your journey with sort of the origin story. If I met a 10-year-old or a 15-year-old Matt Marino, would there be signs that I'm talking to a future revenue executive with a bunch of successful exits?
Probably not at all. Grew up here in the Northwest. My parents were hippies, so my mother was a dietitian. My father was in the Forest Service. So a lot of our activities growing up were focused around food and being outside. So a 10-year-old Matt was, active in sports, active in outdoor activities, was drawn, of course, to math and science fiction, things like that growing up. But I would say nowhere in that early phases, other than perhaps taking an interest in telling stories to people that would help like change their perspective. Maybe that was one insight. As well as just being a very stubborn person in general.
Yeah, I do think that's a characteristic that many of us in this industry hold. You mentioned storytelling and being interested in science fiction. I'm curious if there were any particular books or realms or movies that were interesting to you as a kid that are influential today, or any favorites?
Yeah, I mean, growing up, and a lot of this was passed down from my dad, but I read a lot of comic books growing up. Read a lot of his books. So I read like the Hardy Boys,
Oh, yeah.
all the old Robert E. Howard books on Conan. Pretty much have read all of those. I think probably my first rated R movie I ever saw was Conan the Barbarian.
Interesting.
I certainly had like an interest in that, when I was younger.
So then, the very early part of your career, you actually become a software engineer and an IT consultant. Can you take me through just any memorable moments during that first run of your career? What drew you to that path, and what was it like for you getting started?
Yeah, and I think the path there, maybe it was like a predictable path, like turning to software and computer engineering. I mean, growing up, again, grew up in like a very modest household here in the Northwest. However, the one thing my parents splurged on when I was younger was a computer. So this
Mm.
is like, you know, early 90s, late 80s. And so I was one of the first kids in my school with one. And so at the time, they were obviously like very simple, but I found myself always tinkering, learned to code in high school. And I was drawn to math and science, and I was good at solving problems under pressure. And I sort of let the influence of parents and teachers kind of guide me to study computer engineering in college. Again, they'd say like, "Hey, Matt, you're good at math. You're good at solving problems under pressure. You should go be an engineer." And so that's what I did for my undergraduate education. And one of the benefits about going to school in the Bay Area is just the number of startups that are there. And it's something I didn't really appreciate until I was there living it. And so as a result, I was able to work as a very, very junior level software engineer for startups in the Bay Area. And after graduation, I ended up working for IBM and just absolutely hated it. I was in a division that had no windows, and I was literally in a cubicle in the corner of this building. And it was the type of environment where people would put on their headphones and like review what they'd have to do for the day and just do work. And then I remember my first day, I would go into the seemingly large cafeteria, and there's nobody there. And I remember like going out in the parking lot and people like eating lunch by themselves in their car. I thought this is just like the strangest type of experience. And so did that, and it really opened my eyes to this almost maybe a misunderstanding that I had growing up, or maybe even college, about how there does need to be like this intersection between like what you're good at and what you can do like every single day, that you find fulfilling and rewarding. And for me, as much as I love math and science and solving problems, it kind of hit me then that I needed to kind of leverage my strengths of curiosity and systems thinking and empathy and solve problems not behind a computer terminal, but through people. And I had no idea like that was even a job called sales at the time, right? I mean, a lot of us who fall into this profession, there's no program in school to study for it. Like a lot of us, find the path here in some kind of roundabout way. And mine is not any different, right? Like I took a leap of faith, kind of abandoned the world of engineering and took my very first sales role in, it would have been 20 years ago, like January of 2004, effectively as an SDR, making cold calls. And much to the dismay of my peers, my family, who just thought like, what are you doing? You just, worked your ass off to get this engineering degree. You're doing something that anyone could do, right? And so, yeah, that was certainly like a kind of a crucible moment for me professionally.
Wow, that's really interesting because you don't always hear it that way. And good on you for experiencing some of your own dystopia from one of your sci-fi novels and saying this isn't what I want, and making the change to something that not always dreamt about. Hey, getting into sales, right? Sometimes it has this stigma. It's understandable if some of your friends and peers are saying, what are you doing? But you obviously start doing well at some point. So maybe you could take me through a moment when you start to realize, whether it's in that SDR role or as you move forward, oh, this is for me. Like I fit here.
Yeah. Gosh, so much of it I just give credit to early on having just really good managers. As somebody who had never made a cold call and was shy on the phone, had a hard time with rejection. I mean, I had a lot of things stacked against me about even doing this as a job. And this was early, 2004 or so. And so the sales tech stack was much more basic then, right? It was like calling off of a Excel document and putting like a yes or no next in a column if people were interested or not. It was hard, right? I mean, we all know cold calling's hard. We all know sales is hard. And I remember it was like month 2 or 3, and getting yelled at and sweared at, like all the things that we're kind of used to when we're doing cold outbound. I just remember having a moment where like, gosh, like this is not for me. This is, what am I doing? I think a lot of people go through these self-doubts when they either make a career change or enter a job that is stretching their abilities more than they thought they were capable of. And yeah, thankfully at the time, I just had like a couple of really good bosses who gave me a lot of good coaching, gave me a lot of like positive reinforcement. And something happened like, after kind of 4 or 5 months where there's just like, there's a mental click that just turned over for me that made me realize that I could apply this strong technical background with an ability to like talk to people and learn about their situation, while at the same time having kind of zero disregard for the emotional toil that sales has. And once I really kind of learned to be able to, again, pair the technical background with the technical SaaS solutions that we were selling, it was a really big unlock for me, because I was looking around at my peers who were either SDRs or AEs or customer success, and they didn't have that, right? And I learned to be able to just leverage that more through my career.
That makes a lot of sense. And you then do leverage it, and you start to move up the ranks, and you then go to Visa at some point. And I want to talk about this jump specifically because you kind of are taking an adventure here in not just going to Visa, but you're going to Visa in Australia, and you're also going to start leading a relatively sizable team. So you've got a lot of things kind of happening in your life, presumably, and then also in your professional world. Can you take me through your evolution through that experience?
Sure. So while at CyberSource, was fortunate to experience nearly every type of sales role. So SDR, AE, customer success. I even moonlit as a sales engineer for one point. I had my first kind of very kind of junior management level role, having a small team. But it wasn't until the Visa acquisition, which was my first time being a part of going through the process of being acquired by another company, that really opened up the doors for a much bigger, broader leadership role. And when that acquisition happened, Visa had a pretty obviously a strong relationship and working model with financial institutions, but they weren't doing anything with consumers or merchants. And so they as part of the thesis behind acquiring CyberSource, they wanted to like use this as a springboard to do more of that. And so they needed people to go lead teams around the world. And in particular, they're looking for leaders who go to either Sao Paulo, Brazil, Singapore, or Sydney, Australia. And I was like, well, I don't speak Portuguese and I hate humidity, but Sydney sounds pretty nice. And my wife and I were recently married. We're living in San Francisco. And yeah, I got this like awesome opportunity to go be employee number one in this new market.
Wow.
And it was literally like a one-way ticket to Sydney. We didn't have kids, and so in some ways it was relatively easy. But the metrics of success were really clear. They're like, hey, you need to hire a team, become profitable, and obtain 20% of the commerce market share in Australasia in 4 years. Yeah, and so there's again a lot of trepidation about doing that and starting that, and in one ways it's easy because it's Australia and it's Western and English speaking, but it's still like a long ways from everything.
Yeah.
And you're still having to build a team and build credibility as a foreigner.
Absolutely. And so I'm not going to go through every experience because you go on, you lead sales for a lot of companies. You start doing advisory work, you start doing, fractional CRO work, you start doing a lot of stuff. And I want to just go back to, I saw a talk that you gave about sales coaching and some pitfalls. So at all the stops that you went through, I'm curious how your coaching style evolved as you got used to the rhythm of leadership.
Mm-hmm. I would say it evolved in 3 key ways. I think the first was looking for and being able to find where passion exists in people. And I've learned to appreciate that passion is the rocket fuel for high performance. And it's not often always identifiable what that is for each person, right? And for, again, as much as there's this stigma about salespeople are avaricious and want to make money, it's that passion is often more than just making money. There's some other underlying current of motivation. And I would say part of my coaching has evolved to just firstly try to understand what that is for each person and be able to like almost exploit and use that passion as much as possible. The second thing that has been more important for me as a manager and as a leader, as it relates to coaching, and is probably like one of the biggest unlocks that no one ever really talks about, and that is just providing clarity. And in particular, it's really around role clarity and what they should be doing, like the clarity on the actions they should be taking. Yeah. And so often for either startups or teams that are evolving or growing quickly, up here, there's a lot of ambiguity and noise and consternation. And that's really like management and leadership's job to like figure stuff out and ultimately distill it as clearly as possible to the teams who work for them so that they don't have to deal with that noise. And when a manager, what I found myself being able to provide very clear instruction on like what their role is, take sales, for example, right? Like something as simple as like beyond like, where's my territory and who am I prospecting? What's the ICP? But things like, how long should I stay involved in the deal after it closes? How am I compensated? And I think it's easy for us to wave our hands sometimes and say that things will be figured out, or you need to be flexible, et cetera. But I've found that to the degree that we can provide that sort of role clarity is a big unlock. And then secondly, okay managers are the ones that describe like the what and the why, but the really good ones are able to explain the how. And whether that's, how do you prospect, how do you upsell, how do you improve time to revenue, how do you improve margins, how do you run a multi-threaded sales process, that clarity in the how is another big unlock that allows you to coach more effectively, because you know what good looks like and you're able to benchmark that individual against the good playbook.
I love the piece about passion as the rocket fuel. I think that's pretty interesting. I'm curious, is there a story behind that? Does that come from you, or did you extract that from a number of interactions? I'm curious how you kind of landed at that.
Yeah, I've found maybe partly it was just my own introspection. I tend to, when I am doing something, go all in 100%, and often get frustrated when I work with people who don't reciprocate that level of energy. And these are things like outside of business as well. Yeah, I had a good like coach mentor at the time who helped open up my eyes to just the world that, everyone has their own set of interests, struggles, and yet there's things that we're all, deeply concerned or interested in, and just being able to like just learn what that is ultimately like the for most people, like the motivating factor for why they get up and why they hustle and why they work hard, why they you to do that day in and day out.
I like that. And one of the things that you kind of touched on is like coaching at the personal level. And some of the different like sales personalities that we talk about are these kind of like, major achievers. We kind of know about them. And then we know about these ones that are really struggling, and we have plans for them. One thing that you've touched on in your work is these middle performers, which is a large proportion of sellers, but they don't get as much love or as much attention, perhaps, in some of the content that we see. How do you think about managing performance for those that are kind of in the middle of the pack?
Mm-hmm. Gosh, and I think it is also such a great indicator of the effectiveness of a leader or manager is how they're able to improve the performance of the middle tier, right? Because if you look at the bell curve, like there's often a pretty clear strategy about what to do for the low performers. There's often a clear strategy with what to do for the ones that are high and kicking it. But the ones that are middle of the pack, often are, I don't know, 70 to 80% of quota, are good employees, generally have a positive attitude. There's nothing outwardly kind of wrong with them per se. And I think in maybe years ago, it would have been more comfortable for me to leave those people alone and have this assumption that, like they just need more time, or they just need more learning, or they're just having a bad week or bad quarter. And I've come to realize that's just like a very bad framework, right? And everybody, right, like stands to benefit from having proactive learning and development, like regardless of where you are on that bell curve. And so by knowing, where they need to improve respective to their job, sometimes it's a small thing, but sometimes it's much bigger. And I've found that by having a development plan that is largely employee led, is also just an unlock for those middle performers, because often like these are people who are still like highly motivated in their careers, have interest to advance to another role, have some sort of interest in just doing well or getting recognition. And so having like a paper trail of like, okay, like this is what you say you're good at, and this is, take an honest look at like the things that you need to get better at, provides a much more effective development framework, because it's being led by them, it's being supported by the manager, it's being supported by the company. And it shows too that you care about making them better, and not, again, as a means solely to improve their quarter over quarter or year over year performance, so just make them better people.
Absolutely. There's no rep left behind, right? You're not just forgetting about this sort of wash. Everyone is part of your charter. So I think that that's a great demonstration of leadership, and I enjoy the referendum on a leader as how they're dealing with this sort of middle of the bell curve.
Mm.
I'm curious. You're CRO, you're advisor, and then you've been in the direct just sales leadership roles. So I imagine you have thoughts about just go-to-market alignment across the executive team, across different organizations within a company. Can you talk about your experience in thinking about go-to-market alignment? What are you seeing in the market? What thoughts do you have on the topic?
Mm-hmm. Sure. And this is probably like the most or one of the top three most important things to get right. And what I've learned in the past has been, as much as when you join a company or you join a team, you want to get that as quickly as possible. You can't until you've earned and engendered trust with the rest of the executive team and the rest of your team. And so for me, the concept of trust is, I mean, firstly, that it's not static, right? Trust is either constantly being built up or it's being brought back down. And so when you are working with a set of peers or you have a team, just because you did something last month or last quarter or last week doesn't necessarily mean they're going to remember it. And so it's like being able to show that you are competent, that you approach things with a sense of empathy, and you take like a one team approach goes a long way in being able to then put together a framework for go-to-market alignment. And I think, a lot of people have spoken about this recently because it's become so important with the current market conditions and whatnot. But my own beliefs are that the right go-to-market alignment is based on ensuring that everyone at that executive team, across product, marketing, sales, even folks like legal and finance, just have a strong understanding of the unit economics for the business, like where money is being spent, how revenue is being generated, the margins, the growth, et cetera. And then ensuring that there's a common set of data with which everyone is referencing. So the right, data hygiene, looking at the same numbers. There's not a different, you don't want finance having their own Excel document and sales pulling things from the CRM, but there's just a common repository so that nothing's hidden. And then lastly, and probably the hardest thing to often articulate or even get other people interested in, is being able to architect your customer journey or customer experience from first touch to many years down the line. And there's a lot of things that happen in that, right? Because that impacts budget for hires, it impacts the product, it impacts marketing spend. But I've found, again, getting the unit economics really understood, having common data hygiene, and then aligning on the consensus of a general customer journey goes a long way in that GTM alignment.
Did that happen for you? That I'm making an assumption here when you went to Visa. I'm just curious because you're pretty young at that time in your career, and you're coming from sales. You've done some technical work, but you're running a business. You're talking about profit and loss at an early age. I think a lot of sales leaders don't have exposure to that. Am I connecting the dots correctly? That experience woke you up to how a business runs?
It certainly did, and I went in there guns blazing, very vocal, very extroverted and gregarious with announcing a decree of what we needed to do. And I knew my numbers, I knew the business, I knew the product, I knew the market really well. But what I didn't do at the time was I didn't spend the time to develop the trust that was needed with my peers. And that was the big learning from that. How if trust is ultimately the conduit to influence, you need to make sure that's established beforehand.
That makes a lot of sense. And so you've been at technology forward companies in the payment space. Now you have some companies that you're advising in AI, and you've been in a number of kind of tech forward industries, and then you have a software engineering background. I'm curious what your take is on the current state of SaaS. There's talk on various message boards or what have you that SaaS is dying. Where do you stand on this?
Oh gosh, I do think like right now is a bit of a reckoning for SaaS, and I don't know if it's dying, but it's going to look a lot different, and I think it's going to look different for three primary reasons. The first is just there's just less demand now than there has been, and that's a product of there being just so many vendors to choose from, but so many companies they're already running like a myriad of solutions. So there's less demand. The other premise is that part of the model of SaaS is the understanding that, hey, there's high initial customer acquisition costs. So that's why SaaS businesses go and raise a bunch of money and then, spend a lot on marketing and sales to go and acquire those customers. And for the longest time, they thought, okay, like there's high customer acquisition costs, but you know what? Once they sign up, they're going to stay for a long time. Like there's low churn, there's long lifetime value. And I think that assumption is also largely incorrect in that individuals as well as businesses change more often than we like to admit. And sometimes they change for financial reasons, sometimes they change for personal reasons. But this idea of like solutions being sticky, I don't really buy it as much as I used to, just because companies have made it so easy to port and migrate from one to another. And then the last, I think, challenge for SaaS, and this is probably not relevant now, but it will be in a year or so, and that is that most SaaS businesses, other than like pure API businesses, but most SaaS businesses exist in a way to take an abstract data and provide some type of UI that makes all that data more readable and understandable and relatable, right? We all know SaaS businesses where there's a dashboard or there's an integration into a CRM or a workflow. But with what AI will be able to do by being able to either have AI agents do the work or just simply just asking a prompt for it, it really negates the need of ever having any sort of UI, because you can just ask for whatever visualization or flowchart or data representation you would like to see. And so it seems like this new breed of technology companies are often developing code and software that doesn't even have a UI because it's not needed anymore. And so I think that's going to certainly disrupt SaaS in the next year or two.
That's interesting. So for the companies that you're advising or you're working with, is that what you're telling them to do? I mean, I'm sure it's dependent on the business, but you're saying, hey, let's focus on what the API is going to be doing in 3 years versus how can we make this UI perfect today? How do you balance getting them to market today and getting some of that revenue in the door versus building for what you think the future is going to be like?
My own take is like the answer to that is largely, I don't know, maybe more like philosophical. And that is, do you want the workers who are going to use this software, do you want them to do stuff or do you want them to think? And AI has the ability to do either. And so some companies are taking the approach of, you know what, we want the AI to do all the thinking, all of the number crunching, and we're just going to help teams just make their workflow easier. And some companies are taking the opposite. It's like, oh, actually, no, we're going to have AI automate all of the routine tasks, and we're going to let humans do what they do best, and that's using their brain to think. And so I think it's probably more of an understanding of, the kind of left brain, right brain analogy. Like, what do you want people actually doing for their job? The area that I lean towards is to, wherever possible, outsource the cognitive math part. Is that left brain?
I don't know.
I forgot. Let's assume it's left brain, right? Sure. Anyway, like outsource all of that to machines and computers who can think and do that. And the things that require emotional intelligence, creativity, spontaneity, leave that with us humans.
I like that. That question was purely selfish as I go through that journey. So I appreciate the answer. I also appreciate your thought that maybe stickiness is in fact what's dead. And I'm going to steal that and repurpose it, but I'll credit you. So thank you for that as well. All right, so I've got two more questions. And first off, that is a real background behind you. Those are your books.
Real background, yeah, real books. There's probably some Conan the Barbarian books in there somewhere.
So I was going to ask, is there a favorite? Is it still Conan, or what are you reading now?
Oh
that,
gosh,
keeps you going?
I tend to often alternate between like a fiction and a nonfiction book. What I am reading right now is really boring. It's by William Durant on like the history and story of philosophy. It like chronicles the evolution of philosophy. I was one class short of getting a minor in philosophy in college, so I will often every once a year or so crack open a philosophy book. I'm enjoying that right now. I've also really enjoyed The Beginning of Infinity by David Deutsch.
Okay.
That was just probably one of the most like eye-opening books I've read in a long time. What else have I enjoyed? Speaking of fiction, Killers of the Flower Moon, which just, I mean, it's actually not fiction. It's a real story, but told in such like a novel-based format. So yeah, I am, and I'm the type of person as well where I can do one or two books at a time, but any more than that, I start to like lose track of what I'm reading.
My wife can do that, and it impresses me that you can do two. She'll have tons open. I can do one, and I love my one, but I'm so deep into it that I just can't quite pull away. So I do like you, and I like to rotate. But I'm going to check out some of those that you mentioned. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate those. And then lastly, if you go back to software engineer Matt, and you're perhaps in the doldrum of that kind of scary office building, and you're feeling a little sad about your choices and thinking about making that change, knowing what you know now, I'm curious what advice you'd give to your younger self about a career in sales, career in general, or how he should approach things.
I would have told myself that life is a lot longer and more dynamic than we ever give it credit for. And that people also have the ability to change more than we give them credit for, ourselves included. And that change requires a level of attention and proactiveness, and it's hard. When you do it for the right reasons, it can be absolutely worthwhile. And for me, again, I didn't know that a career in sales would be as fulfilling and fun and exciting and challenging as I've learned. And in a way, it makes me wonder, gosh, what are all the other experiences and interests that I haven't even pursued that are as rewarding as what I've happened to find in sales leadership?
I love that. That's sort of a beautiful note to end on. So I'll stop there. But Matt, thanks so much for taking the time. We'll link to your profile and everything that you've got online in the show notes. And I'm really grateful to you for joining us. And we'll look forward to keeping in touch in the future.
You bet. Thanks, Kevin.